Hello, I'm Andrew Penner. I'm the president of the AE Canada East chapter. We welcome you to today's webinar on sustainable financing. As a chapter of the Association of Energy Engineers, the AE Canada East looks to espouse the mission and values of AE. We are the local expression of AE, and for some, we represent their sole window into the International Association. As an association, it was founded in 1977 and has grown to include more than 18,000 members across 100 countries, and we operate over 90 chapters just like ours. So it's a pretty diverse and international group. Since 2007, CWEEL has been committed to advancing gender equality in a historically male-dominated industry. Its members gain valuable access to the network of professional peers and mentors, career advancement opportunities, and leading-edge technical training. With the support of CWEEL and its women members, the AEE supports a greater diversity of experience, talent, and ideas across our industry. And I think it's really important to understand that CWEEL is not exclusive to women. Of course, everybody and anybody is welcome to join CWEEL. CWEEL is more an acknowledgement, again, of breaking down the barriers in that historically male-dominated industry. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic on to some of our CWEEL coordinators, members of our board on our chapter, to introduce our speaker and the topic.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone. My name is Afaf Azzouz. I'm one of the CWEEL board members, and I wanted to introduce my great friend and colleague, Sarah Bucko. Sarah has a really exciting bio. Sarah leads sustainability and climate in Atlantic Canada as a partner in Deloitte's risk advisory practice, and is responsible for leading the sustainability and climate for Deloitte's government and public sector clients nationally. She works with clients to understand and respond to their ESG and climate risks, integrate sustainability across all functions of their organizations, and build more resilient and sustainable businesses and operations. To these clients, she brings more than 20 years of experience in a variety of private and public roles, and she's practically worked with all levels of government and crown corporations. In 2019, Sarah was awarded the Clean 50 Award, recognizing her as a leading sustainability professional and for her commitment to clean capitalism across Canada. I wanted to end by actually really mentioning why we chose Sarah for this this convoluted topic that not a lot of people know about. We are an association of energy engineers at the end of the day. So Sarah is an environmental scientist when it comes to her background. Even though she's not a financial advisor, I think she has a great ability to decode how to speak about sustainable finance to everyone like us who isn't involved in this in financial advisory on a day-to-day basis. And she has been heavily involved and in fact led multiple green bonds programs within her current and previous jobs. So without further ado, I welcome Sarah Bucko.
Super. Thank you very much, Afaf, for the introduction. So I'm going to share my screen. So I'll just take a moment here. Great. I believe that everyone can see my screen. And Afaf, I will defer to you to let me know if that's not true.
We can see your screen. We're good.
Excellent. Good. Well, thanks very much for allowing me to join in and present on sustainable finance. So I just wanted to make note, and Afaf alluded to the fact that I am not a finance professional. I am an environmental scientist, but throughout my career, I have had exposure into the finance and sustainable finance. So I just thought that I would start there. I'm going to spend some time talking about my career journey, and then I'll talk about the link between sustainability and finance functions, give some overview of what sustainable finance is, and then I thought I would do more of a deeper dive into two of my roles in my career. One is with TransLink, Metro Vancouver's transportation provider, and I'm going to talk about our green bond program and what that looked like and how that was managed. And then I'm going to talk about my previous role before joining Deloitte, where I led a climate investment center here in Halifax. And I'll talk about our ESG, or our sustainable investing program. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end. I also want to mention too that if you do have a burning question, then feel free to put it in the Q&A, and Afaf or Jana will flag it, and I can answer questions as we go if needed. So to start off, I thought I would touch on my career. So I've been working in this field since 2000. So started my career in consulting, and I graduated from environmental science from the University of Guelph in sort of the latter half of 1999. And I decided at that point to jump into my career, and I didn't pursue a master's. And at the time, I made the decision because I had student loans to pay off, and my career sort of kept progressing. And I thought that at that point, there was more value to me in working in different positions than taking a step away and doing my master's. And that doesn't mean that I'm not considering, or I might not do my MBA perhaps at one point, or my master's of public administration, but I have just stuck with my career from sort of day one. The first job that I had out of school was with a small company in Victoria called Northwest Environmental. And in this role, I focused more on environmental engineering. So the reason why I think I got this job here in Victoria was because my thesis program at the University of Guelph was related to studying the contamination of an industrial fire at a tire factory in Hamilton, Ontario. So while my focus was environmental science, this job was really sort of aligned with environmental engineering. And through this work, I was able to help with a team, a community organization in Hamilton, which my mom was the chair of at the time, study what this fire meant in terms of contaminated sites for Hamilton and the impact to the community. So joining Northwest Environmental, it was just me and the two owners of the company. And I started my career working in contaminated sites, doing water and water monitoring, asbestos sampling, et cetera. And that gave me a really good sort of understanding of what it meant to start in consulting. And it was a good sort of first career for me. And then I decided to move to the East Coast. So you'll notice that I've bumped around quite a bit in Canada. But I joined a company called Jakes Whitford, which was a Canadian firm of about 1,600 people. And they were acquired in 2008 by Stantec. So again, I started my career at Jakes Whitford in environmental engineering, where I was doing phase 1 and phase 2 site assessments. On site, I guess I also want to just note that throughout my career, I've always worked on, until recently, worked on sort of sites, construction sites, early in my career, being sort of a younger woman with a white hard hat, trying to sort of gain the respect of mostly men, not always, but mostly men on the site. And I always found that the best ways sort of to handle myself was to make a connection with those people on site and then get into the work. So that was just something that I learned early in my career, being in sort of more of a male-dominated space and starting my career quite young. So I just wanted to kind of note that. I decided at Jakes Whitford, and I was given the opportunity to move my career into more of a proactive, I guess, side, where previously I was reacting to spills, I was reacting to contamination, and I wanted to be more on the proactive, like how would I help stop spills from happening? So most of my focus was on environmental management systems and environmental compliance auditing. So with that, I was able to visit various mine sites and water treatment plants. I've been in northern forestry communities. I got to spend 2 weeks in remote Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba working on Health Canada facilities. So a really interesting career. And here I got exposed to more of moving from environmental management systems to more sustainability thinking. So not just environment, but what does that social side look like? What does quality, what does risk look like? And I was lucky enough at that company, where I was a shareholder at Jakes Whitford later in my career there, to be at the table when executive started talking about what sustainability meant for the organization and what it meant for our clients. So from a consulting perspective. So that was in 2007. So pretty early in sort of the evolution of sustainability to start talking about that. And I was lucky enough to lead Jakes Whitford's first sustainability report that we published in 2008. And from there, I moved back to the West Coast from where I'm from. And Jakes Whitford was acquired by Stantec, which we all are familiar with Stantec. And I stayed there for about a year and a half until I decided to make another move. And I joined a company called MHPM Project Leaders, which was renamed to Colliers Project Leaders. So this company is owned by Colliers Real Estate, so very much focused on buildings, energy management. I did my certified energy manager training and got that accreditation when I was at this organization. A lot of lead work, and I still supported my clients from an EMS perspective, as well as helped the firm internally with their sustainability program. So a really good sort of experience, moving more of a focus on buildings and energy management. I'll just touch on my last three quickly, because I'm going to go more into a deeper dive later in the presentation on TransLink and HCI3. But I decided that I wanted to, after 13 years of consulting, go in-house and just see what it looked like from the other side, and stand up a sustainability program basically from scratch, and manage it right through to reporting to the board and having sort of documents and strategies on paper. So I was offered the opportunity to join TransLink, which is Vancouver and Metro Vancouver's regional transportation provider. So responsible for the buses, the C buses, and the SkyTrain, as well as roads and infrastructure. So I joined as their Director of Sustainability and Enterprise Risk Management. And interestingly enough, I reported to the CFO. And that was my first sort of exposure. And I hadn't really fully understood or fully appreciated that really strong link between sustainability and finance. So that was sort of my first experience in finance and in the team. At TransLink, I was responsible for our sustainability report, which we published every year. I led with my team our low carbon fleet strategies, so transitioning our bus fleet to electric buses, as well as our company vehicles. We developed a facility renewable energy plan, so looking at our whole building portfolio and how to get that to net zero by 2050. I led the carbon credit program for the organization and green bonds, which I'll talk about. So just very, very quickly, moving back to the East Coast when there was COVID, and my husband's born and raised on the East Coast, and we decided to make the move with my 8-year-old son and my senior dog, just have more space, be closer to family. I led a climate investment center. So I'm going to speak about HCI3 a little bit later, but it's the Halifax Climate Investment, Innovation and Impact Fund. So we'll just hold on that one. And as Afaf mentioned, I'm now very lucky to have a partner role at Deloitte leading sustainability and climate. So a somewhat linear career, I would say. And my career has also sort of progressed as sustainability and climate has progressed. So when I started, sustainability wasn't a term that was used. I can't even recall when in my career we started using the term sustainability. I guess it might have been 2002, 2004 at Jakes Whitford. And so I feel like I've been very fortunate with my career. I feel very passionate about my career and very lucky that I've had this career. At the bottom, I just wanted to point out that these are the boards that I've represented and been a member of. So currently I'm a board member of the Halifax Partnership, which is our economic commission here for the city. And then at the top, Afaf mentioned Clean 50. And I also wanted to note that I'm very passionate about mentorship, and I was lucky enough to be a mentor under the Women for Climate mentorship program led out of the city of Vancouver. So that was in 2000 and I suppose 2021 that I did that. And I still mentor and I still have a relationship with my mentee. So we meet on a monthly basis, and I have a number of informal mentorships, and I coach 3 individuals in my team here at Deloitte. So something that I'm super passionate about, and I welcome conversations and coffee chats and however I can help people in their career. I really love to do that. So now I'll talk about the role of finance in relation to ESG. So ESG is a term that's sort of used interchangeably with sustainability. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So you'll hear me sort of flip between the two, and I just wanted to kind of make that clear. Around the table, people would understand what kind of falls under the environmental topic, whether that's climate, GHG emissions, water management, waste management, etc. Under the social topic of ESG, we're looking at things like safety, employee wellness programs, labor relations, diversity, equity, and inclusion generally falls under social. So those are the topics that we think of under social. And then governance is related more to management responsibilities, things like board oversight, privacy of data falls under governance, as does transparency and reporting. So I just wanted to give some context about what we mean, or what I mean when we talk about ESG. So when you think of sustainability, some people use like triple bottom line, and we're all referring sort of to the same thing. And it feels like the industry is moving more to using the term ESG versus sustainability. So I thought that I would just touch on that. When we think about the role of finance as it relates to sustainability, we're seeing quite a big shift for thinking and responsibilities being under finance. And I thought that this was really important to touch on, because organizations typically, and still to this day, tend to have sort of siloed sustainability functions. And in order to sort of go up the maturity curve, or kind of become sort of a more advanced organization when it comes to sustainability or ESG, a model that a lot of organizations are thinking towards is, how do we make sure that sustainability isn't just siloed, but it's embedded across the organization? And I thought that I would touch on why finance has a role as it pertains to sustainability. So generally under finance, a lot of work happens or is housed with corporate strategy. So the organization itself has their business plan and their maybe 5-year corporate strategy on what they want to achieve and what their targets are and their goals are for that organization. So a lot of companies now are thinking, why would we have a standalone ESG or sustainability strategy? If it's truly part of our business, it should be integrated into our core corporate strategy. So that conversation generally typically happens within finance, or finance has a very strong role in developing that corporate strategy. Probably not surprising is reporting, because a lot of finance departments are regulated in terms of their financial reports and sort of the rigor on how they report. So what kind of data, what kind of controls do they have on that data? That check and balance to make sure that that data is accurate and it is okay to be out there and published and to the public. So when you think about sustainability reporting, it's really important to also have that framework and that level of rigor, as I mentioned, when it comes to sustainability data. So we're seeing quite a strong connection between sustainability and finance with sustainability reporting, and following sort of that process that the finance team uses to report on their financial performance. I'll just touch on a couple more. So when it comes to capital planning, certainly at TransLink, capital planning fit and sat under our CFO and our finance department. And thinking through the role that finance capital planning has with sustainability. When you think of a capital plan, so at TransLink, it was a 10-year capital plan. It was important to make sure that sustainability and ESG and environmental impacts were considered when we were thinking through capital plans and prioritizing projects. So without that, you're viewing your capital projects, I guess, not as holistically as you should. So if you can think through, if you had 20 projects on your capital plan, often there's way more than that, but if you had 20 and you had a lens of the climate impacts of those projects, and it became part of your weighting on where you wanted to put your sort of your capital and where you wanted to put your investments, then that could change which projects sort of became more priority. So it's important now to think broader than just like the finance of these projects, but to expand it into thinking about climate, social benefits to the community, etc. So I'll move on to the next slide here. I don't think I'm going to spend too much time here because it kind of repeats what I said. But this slide talks about not just finance, but where else does sustainability fit with an organization? In operations, they are basically the day-to-day involvement in an organization. So when I think back to my role at TransLink, operations were those teams that were responsible for getting the buses on the road, maintaining the buses, making sure that scheduling was done. So they have a really, really strong role as it pertains to ESG because they're the people on the ground making the organizations work. In terms of climate, we see a strong and a very important role in operations because they have that sort of on the ground expertise. And when you think about climate planning, and you'll see the words here on the slide around scenario analysis, they're the ones who can think through and understand, well, what does a 1 degree change in temperature look like for our operations? Does our workforce need to have air conditioning? How do we make sure that water is available? What do our buildings look like? Like, are they heat domes? What does our transit system look like? So those are the people who can really think through scenarios and different climate impacts on the operations. So that was just one example of ESG as it pertains to a different function other than finance. Legal compliance and regulatory is probably not too surprising. So they keep an eye and keep track of legislation, regulations in this space, as well as various requirements as it pertains to reporting. And then finally, I'll just touch quickly on IT because we're seeing more and more conversation around sustainability in the Department of IT and Technology. And that's because there's more and more focus being put towards data and the level of accuracy as it relates to data. So if you can think through a sustainability report where you've got your greenhouse gas emissions, you've got your waste diversion, you've got your water management, you've got your employee satisfaction, safety data. If you don't have sort of that strong foundation for collecting and measuring and being able to confirm and basically sign off on your data, then you're leaving yourself open to scrutiny. And we're seeing a lot of, and we're hearing a lot of conversation in the media about greenwashing. So a way that a lot of organizations now are thinking about data and reporting is to have programs and software that basically allows organizations to have that oversight and the ability to audit and do that check and balance against data that they're reporting publicly. So we're seeing that conversation move and management of data move from Excel spreadsheets to more embedded software in organizations. All right, so now we get to the fun stuff. So what is sustainable finance? So sustainable finance, I guess quite generally, is the process of thinking through and taking into consideration environmental, social, and governance principles when making investment decisions. So the result is that the investments will contribute to sustainable projects and activities. So when we think through environmental considerations, it could be anything from climate change, adaptation, or mitigation. It could include things like biodiversity, circular economy, etc. Social, I mentioned, could be things or issues related to inclusiveness, inequality, labor relations, and I mentioned governance about being more related to employee relations and management structure. So previously, before sustainable finance, and I can't tell you exactly when this became sort of more, I guess, mainstream, but previously investors had to choose between helping the planet or making money. And it became clear that there were ways to invest where you were doing both, that there was a return, that there was profit to be made at the same time as helping the planet and considering ESG. So what we're seeing now is that more investors want to invest in businesses that will leave behind a better world, and also that they're seeing those returns that they want. I'm going to touch on the bonds, so 1, 2, and 3, a little bit later in the presentation. So what I'll do is just give a very, very quick overview of sustainable linked loans and bonds. So if you can think of a typical loan structure, so if I wanted to go to the bank and I wanted to buy an electric car, I'll use that as an example, and I went to the bank and I said, okay, I would like to get a loan. I would like to purchase an electric car. The idea of these sustainable linked loans is that the bank would then say, okay, well, Sarah, you want to buy your electric car. Well, in order for us to provide this funding to you and this loan to you, we're going to set up metrics. So you have to show us that you're reducing your greenhouse gas emissions by X% year over year. And if those targets are met, then we're going to give you this interest rate on your loan. And if they're not met, then we're going to increase that interest rate. So if you can think then expanding that to a business, if there's a portfolio of projects that the business wants to get a loan for, that's exactly the same process, is that they would then set their metrics and identify what they were going to achieve year over year, or perhaps over 5 years. And if they met it, or if they exceeded it, then their interest rate would be different and more favorable than if they didn't meet those loans, where they would have to pay more in interest. So that's the idea of sustainability linked loans and sustainability linked bonds. And I hope that makes sense to everyone. What we're seeing, and this is quite a busy slide, and I believe that you will have access to these slides after, is that ESG and sustainability is really shaping investment decisions. So when we think about green bonds, conversation earlier in when I started being involved in green bonds was, oh my gosh, well, we're going to have to pay a bigger interest or a higher interest rate for them. They're not comparable to sort of what we call conventional bonds, but that's not true. So what we're seeing is that interest rates are comparable, and if not, sometimes more favorable for ESG or sustainability bonds. We're also seeing too that there's more interest from investors as it relates to sustainability or green bonds. So investors have targets in their portfolio that they have to meet as it relates to sustainability, which is really important. So they're driving this requirement for sustainability bonds and for organizations to offer bonds that meet environmental or ESG criteria. On the slide, just at the bottom left side, there's an interesting stat here that says 76% of consumers will say that they're going to stop buying from companies that don't treat the environment, employees, or community in which they operate well, or if they treat them poorly. So this is really significant, and it kind of points back to my conversation about greenwashing and why it's really important for companies who are reporting on ESG to make sure that their messaging is supported by strong and transparent data. So if companies don't have that data to support it, then these consumers who are now looking at organizations and wanting this information, they're going to lose trust in those companies, and we're seeing that happen. So quite an interesting point. I'll move down, and I'm going to talk about TransLink's Green Bond Program. Okay, so defining green bonds. So I guess what I wanted to just start with is an explanation of what a bond is. So bonds are a way that an organization or an entity, it could be a government, municipality, corporation, or financial institution. So these are regulated entities where they need to they need investors to help them fund their capital plans, basically. So it's all related to capital planning. And in order for these companies to get enough funding for these projects, they issue a bond. Generally, organizations in the past have issued conventional bonds. So they go out with their banking syndicate or whoever is managing their bond program for them, and they'll say to investors, we need X amount of dollars to for this year for our capital plan. Who is interested in investing in our organization, and at what interest rate? So there's that conversation about interest rates. So it's no different than me shopping around, let's say, to different banks to say I need a loan, and who's going to give me the best interest rate. So let's just kind of think of bonds that way. The difference between a conventional bond and a green bond is that a green bond requires you to link the dollars that you get as an organization from investors to environmental projects. So a conventional bond, it doesn't matter what projects they are, it's just a lump sum money that the organization is looking for. And there's no requirement to report back to the investors on what those dollars were used for. Green bonds are different that way, in that there is that requirement to link those dollars to the projects and then report after, which I'll speak to in a bit. I also just wanted to mention too that I'm talking about green bonds, but there's something called social bonds. So it's the same framework, except the dollars that are invested are linked to social projects. And then there's a sustainability bond where your program can be both environmental and sustainability projects. So just if you wanted to keep that in mind, that there's green bonds, there's social bonds, and then there's sustainability bonds, which capture both. The purpose of green bonds is to link specific projects with the positive environmental impact, which I'll mention about. There's more transparency related to green bonds than conventional bonds because there is that requirement to report year over year after that bond is issued. And there's a requirement too oftentimes green bonds are evaluated by an independent party, which I'll talk about as well. So I'll move to the next slide here. When we think about issuing a green bond, and this, I'll just walk through this in my experience with TransLink. So the first step that TransLink took, we had our 10-year capital plan, and we realized first of all, being a transit agency and primarily our main function and our main purpose to operate was sustainable transportation, we realized that a significant portion of our capital plan, our 10-year capital plan, actually had green projects. So we say green projects, but projects with environmental benefits. So if you can think of LEED buildings, if you can think of purchasing electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure, some of our projects were related to purchasing renewable fuels. So when we looked at our capital plan, it became clear that we were really positioned well to issue a green bond. So my team worked with finance to review the capital plan and think through what would we consider green and how would we measure the environmental impacts. And I'll talk about that measurement and reporting because it is quite challenging. So once we were able to say, okay, well, yeah, we have the sort of mass of green projects where we have enough that we would issue a bond for, then we went into the second phase of a green bond framework. And I put the logo up in the top corner, but there's a principle called the Green Bond Principles, which outlines what to include in a framework. That framework is published, and it basically just talks about how you're going to assign the dollars invested to the green projects, who's responsible, and how you're going to report after the bond issuance and annually on that impact report. The second party opinion is voluntary, but TransLink, we decided to do that. And basically that's a review of the Green Bond Framework to make sure that it meets the needs and it aligns with the Green Bond Principles. And also an important part here too is that as part of the second party opinion, the company that we used made sure that TransLink had a sustainability program and that we had that commitment as an organization to sustainability. And that was really important for our second party opinion, that we weren't just issuing a green bond because we wanted to get the publicity or that we thought that we would get a better rate, that sustainability was embedded in the organization itself. The step 4 was we went and we had a number of investor tours. So we met in New York, we met in Montreal for the bond that I was involved with, Toronto, and we answered questions that investors had about our green bond and our green project. So that was just to get the momentum and get the excitement about our bond. When we issued our bond, it basically means that we put it out for sale and we had investors say, we're interested. and we're interested for this much. And I'll talk about TransLink's issuance in a bit. And then the last step is impact reporting, which I'll move to. I'm just looking at the time, but I do have a slide on that. So the good news is at TransLink, we issued 2 bonds when I was there. Our first one was for $400 million, and our second one was for $200 million. So we were able to, in both those years, identify that sort of dollar amount of projects in our capital plan that we would consider green. And for the second bond, when we went out, and again, so we lined up our bond, we had all the investors on a call, we had that excitement behind us, and the day of issuance, basically opening up the book to say TransLink is now ready to ask for $200 million from investors. We were actually sold out within about 45 minutes, which is unheard of. So that means that there were so many investors wanting to buy and sort of subscribe into our bond that we didn't actually have enough to meet all the investors' needs. So we actually had about $400 million of interest for this green bond, which was incredible. And we were able to, so if you can imagine, so out of the 400 million of interest, we were able to give preference to what we considered and what our banking support considered as dark green investors. So we were able to say, out of this list of investors that are interested, let's give preferential treatment and to those investors who are also demonstrate sort of that commitment to sustainable investing. So that was about 75% of the allocations of that 200 million, which is really cool. And then we also attracted 9 new investors to the organization that had never sort of expressed interest and invested in TransLink's conventional bonds. So a really good news story for the organization. I'll touch on this really quickly, but this is how we linked up. At the top, you can see clean transportation, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. So those were our green bond project categories. And then you'll see the public transit projects as well as the building energy and efficiency improvements. Those were the specific projects that we included in our second bond. And then you'll see the key performance indicators associated with each of those projects. There's no standard to impact reporting for green bonds. And to be honest, it's a bit of an art. So there's a lot of assumptions that have to go with this reporting. And the reason being is that you're trying to tie dollars invested in a project to environmental benefits. So it could be $1 per a ton of reduction of carbon equivalent. So for your greenhouse gas emissions. And for some of these projects, if you can kind of read through them, it's difficult to come out and figure out in that year what that ton of carbon reduction would look like, or the energy efficiency, or the energy improvements. So we did the best that we could, and we made sure that we had a third-party review of our impact report, and that we had almost a page of assumptions. Being a scientist, I really value making sure that we document our assumptions. So that was a bit of a arc, a little bit, but based in science and the best that we could do. The industry is changing, and there's a lot of conversation right now about developing standards for impact reporting, which will be really helpful for the industry. All right, I'm just looking at time here, so I'm just going to go through the next slides a little bit quicker so we have time for questions. My role that I had before I joined Deloitte was leading the Halifax Climate Investment, Innovation and Impact Fund. And this is a really, really cool organization and consortium of centers across Canada. So it's housed under what we call the Low Carbon City Canada program, which is administered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So the concept here is that there's 7 centers or 6 centers across Canada who are responsible for investing in local climate solutions. So you can see Metro Vancouver here. There's an Alberta Climate Innovation Fund, which is based in both Calgary and Edmonton. We've got the Atmospheric Fund, Ottawa, Montreal, and Halifax. So the concept of the Low Carbon Cities Canada actually came from the Atmospheric Fund, where, gosh, it must be 20 years ago, they received endowment funding through their province, so the province of Ontario, to basically stand up this center and use that endowment to invest in local climate action, which I'll explain a little bit more about. So the full network received $183 million from FCM, and it was divvied up between each of these centers in sort of different ways. It wasn't, each center didn't receive the same amount of funding, but the concept is that those endowments would be invested, and those returns of investment on your investment would then be used to invest in local projects. So if you can think through your checking bank that you have at your bank, and you see that interest accumulate. So the concept here, obviously in a bigger scale, is that the centers would then use that interest and those returns on those investments to invest in local projects. I'll just touch on this very quickly. So the concept for these centers was to hire an investment manager to invest their endowment. So for Halifax, which I'll talk about on the next slide, we received $15 million from the federal government. And it was up to us to figure out how we wanted to invest that in the market and what sort of our investment principles look like. So in terms of the spectrum of investing, if you look at the beginning here under ESG integration, that basically a way to think of that is that a company would evaluate carbon emissions as part of their investment portfolio. So they would choose companies based on, or look at their portfolio and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with their portfolio. On the opposite end of the spectrum, and I'll just talk about either end, impact investing is where investors will choose specific companies that have a positive impact on the environment. So it goes from a more of a portfolio perspective to more of a detailed positive impact perspective. And the ESG investing can kind of fall anywhere in that spectrum. And this will make more sense when I talk about how we had to make those decisions about where we wanted to be on the in the spectrum as it related to HCI 3. So here, as I mentioned, we received $15 million from FCM to fund the work that my center sort of led within Halifax. There were a number of conditions in our contract as it related to this endowment, mainly being that we had to maintain our $15 million. So while the investment returns kind of went up and down as normal investments do, we had to maintain that $15 million. And there was lots of eyes to make sure that it didn't dip too far below $15 million. We established our investment committee. We had an investment policy to outline where we wanted to invest and what was important to us. And we hired our investment manager, and we went through a really detailed screening of investment managers, probably 8 or so, to make sure that they were leaders in ESG. And what we found is, because of our dollar amount, while 15 million sounds like a lot, in sort of large portfolios, we weren't able to be on the far spectrum of investing because of the amount of dollars because of the amount of the endowment. So we had to just put preferences in our investment policy. So we weren't able to say that we wanted to be 100% fossil fuel free. We had to say that we gave preference to being supporting companies that didn't have investments in fossil fuels. Some of the centers that had larger endowments were able to make those claims and make that commitment to fossil fuel free investments, but we weren't able to with the portfolio that we had. I'll just keep moving here. And this is my last slide before we open it up for questions. But what we found from sustainable investing and from HCI 3 is that we were able to generate better returns with that ESG lens with investing our endowment. And of course, we were able to commit to environmental and social benefits through our investments as much as we could. And those investments aligned with the purpose of the organization, which was to invest in local climate solutions and benefit local communities with the lens of inclusiveness. Challenges were that we were subjected to types of investments that were available. So as I mentioned, we weren't able to invest in some of the areas that we initially wanted to. And because of the market at the time of our investment, our returns and that sort of dollar that we were able to use to invest locally wasn't there as much as we hoped at the beginning, just because of where the market was. And then in terms of reporting back on the investments that we did hold, it was not standardized, and it was a bit tricky to pull out the environmental benefits from the investments that we made. And as I mentioned, there is work to standardize that reporting, both from this sort of perspective of sustainable investing as well as green bonds. So that was a lot of information, but I'd be happy to open it up to questions and see if there's any curious minds out there, Afaf.
Hey, Sarah. You do have one question here.
Sure.
Back to your TransLink part of the presentation on green bonds. Someone's curious, what was TransLink's green bond coupon value?
Oh yeah, good question. So I might actually have that. Just let me just see. I believe, and it will be in one of the green bond reports, but I believe it was around 2.64% on the second one, and it was around 3 point something on the first one. So, and I should preface that that's not all because it was green. The market was just, it was just in a better place, the second bond issuance. But we did see that it wasn't, that it was comparable, or the second one was a better coupon rate than what we expected from a conventional bond. And for those who aren't familiar, coupon rate is basically the interest that the bond is associated with.
Great. Maybe also on your green bond stuff, if we're talking about someone who's looking to get more involved in green bonds at their organization, I know you said this is kind of like a rapidly changing field and always growing. What kind of like new skill sets do you see that people will need to kind of adopt to kind of keep up with this and learn about it throughout their career?
Yeah, good question. So there's lots of materials. If you were to look, the CPA, which is the public accounting Canadian group. So they do have a lot of resources on their website about green bonds and the link between sustainability and finance. So a really good resource. And then I would say too that having those conversations with finance teams and seeing how finance and sustainability can work together and just being part of that conversation really opened my eyes to a lot of areas that I just hadn't really considered before, that sort of that intersection between sustainability and finance.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Looks like there's another question here. Do you see similar financial tools, green bonds, etc., being requested in the United States as well as here in Canada?
Yes. Yeah. So green bonds are popular, or I guess it's global. So not just in Canada. I don't know where green bonds in terms of percentage, where they would be in the US, but certainly in Europe, it's you would see, I don't know if it's the majority, but a significant amount of investment in sort of the green and ESG space in Europe.
Great.
Yeah.
Another question here. I know you mentioned a little bit around like challenges surrounding reporting and guidelines. So someone here asks, do you have a general sense of the timeline with the CPA releasing guidelines and any mandatory reporting?
Yeah, so I think that will come globally first, about standardized reporting. So I guess I'm going to answer this in a bit of a different way. Sustainability reporting in general is changing very quickly. And what we're seeing and coming from Europe mostly is the shift from sustainability reporting sitting in a sustainability function to more of a finance function. And there's something called the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, so TCFD, for those of you that wanted to look it up if you're not familiar. And that shift in reporting is more thinking about the financial impact of ESG and climate on an organization. So aligning sort of the rigor and responsibility of reporting almost to your financial statements. So things are shifting very, very quickly. And again, more of a connection between finance and sustainability. And a lot of our clients are trying to figure out where reporting should fit in their organizations, if it should shift to if it should shift to finance with sustainability support, or does it stay in sustainability with finances support? So sort of a real-time conversation. And we see those mandatory reporting requirements coming from Europe to the States, to the US, to Canada, and probably in the next year or so, companies who are private companies in a certain size will be required to start reporting on their climate disclosures related to their finance.
Great answer. Interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe kind of like also related to sort of that concept of like reporting. I know you mentioned at TransLink going through the conversation of like what is considered green
Yeah.
in terms of like what projects it could be considered for a green bond. Could you go into that a little bit more? Maybe like the definition
Sure.
of green, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So it's up to the organization to determine what green is. And we had a lot of back and forth at TransLink in a couple areas. One was related to our buses. And the conversation was, we're putting buses on the road and we're taking people out of their cars. And it's called mode shift. So inherently we are greening sort of and contributing to the environmental benefit of the region. So could all buses be considered green, and those capital investments in all of our buses, meaning diesel, compressed or natural gas buses, et cetera. And what we decided to do was scope out anything fossil fuel. So it was our green bond framework only included electric buses. So that was a conversation and a decision that we made as an organization. When we went on our investor tours, some of the investors were also very interested in a couple topics. And one in particular was our project category related to renewable diesel. And the conversation was, well, where is that renewable diesel going to be sourced from? And what's the makeup of the renewable diesel? And we learned through those conversations that investors did not want to invest in renewable diesel made from palm oil, primarily and because of the deforestation related to palm oil. So quite a detailed conversation. And then we put in our green bond framework and our project categories that we, sorry, I just got a message pop up that I have to ignore here, that we weren't going to purchase renewable diesel related to palm oil. So those are just a couple of examples. And it was a conversation both with our banks, our investors, and internally on what we would consider green.
Wow, great conversations, I'm sure,
Yeah.
very like nuanced.
For sure, yeah.
Maybe more on kind of the career side of things. Someone's interested in whether you're still mentoring sustainability professionals, and as well, what kind of advice you would offer to someone who's moving maybe more from an environmental sustainability role to more of a finance sustainability role.
Interesting. Okay, so I do mentor. I do have conversations. I should claim, though, that moving into a partner role at Deloitte, my time is a little limited day to day. So I will offer that if people wanted to reach out and send a message on LinkedIn, I in the slides here I do have my LinkedIn. But just be patient if I don't get back right away. So I'll just preface that. But I am very happy to have conversations about this, and I'm very passionate about this field and career progression. So I can't claim, because I'm not a sustainable finance person. I just was lucky enough to be exposed and have that background. But I guess my answer to that would be, in my career, I've always try to do extra, if that makes any sense. Like early in my career at Jakes Whitford, I managed the quality management program. I've always sort of done extra, volunteered, been involved in different conversations, being around the table when we were talking about sustainability. So I guess as much as people can, recognizing that work-life balance is so important, and you have to make sure that you keep care of yourself first, doing those extra things opens up a lot of doors. And I did find that in my career, is that, it just opened up a lot of doors. So if you can have those conversations with your finance team, also getting involved with different boards, whether it's volunteering or organizations, and just having exposure to different avenues and different thinking and different people, then that's another way. I guess that's how I'll answer that very quickly.
Yeah, no, good answer.
Okay.
And then maybe moving from talking about TransLink and green bonds and maybe more into like HCI3 Nova Scotia. There's a question here. Does Nova Scotia have similar potential compared to British Columbia in terms of the sustainability space?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question, because Nova Scotia just doesn't promote it as much as Vancouver and BC. So I was always just saying, wow, there's so much happening here, but we're not talking about it. So an example would be that Halifax, to fund Halifax's climate action plan, got approval through council to have a property tax. So on our property bills, there's a certain percentage that goes to funding climate projects within Halifax, and people don't know about it. And so that's just one example of a lot of really good work happening here. There's a ton of activity as it relates to hydrogen, on and offshore wind, the electric vehicles we're trying. It's a little bit different out here just with provincial mandates, but yeah, there's a ton of great things happening here. I just don't feel like we kind of talk about it as much as Vancouver and BC.
Smaller too. I'm in Halifax too as well right now. So
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Another question on HCI3. You'd mentioned the $50 million and how that wasn't enough to restrict investments to companies with no fossil fuel projects,
Yeah.
and only being able to kind of give the preference to those. There's a question here about what kind of limitations were faced such that the 50 million wasn't enough to kind of strictly only invest in those non-fossil fuel projects.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was 15 million that we received, and I can't recall, it might have been around $20 million where that sort of bottom sort of amount was, where you could have your investments in certain funds. So it wasn't a huge stretch for the organization, but we just didn't have enough to make that investment. So it's and with time. So one thing that I didn't mention, and I'm just looking at time, and I do have to run to my son's parent teacher meeting, but I'll answer this question. There's a requirement as part of the FCM funding agreement that each center is required to match their endowment. So through various ways, through partnerships with private companies, etc. So once that endowment grows, which HCI3 has the goal of and has to, then they will be able to have more significant endowment and be able to make sort of more, if they want, make those decisions to have different investments and those fossil fuel free.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was lots of questions. People are obviously very interested in this topic.
Great.
I really appreciate your time and sharing all your knowledge with us today. We appreciate that a
Well,
lot.
thanks very much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.